Fosterage is a topic I want to go over for many people, because it's a topic many people can't get their head around in early medieval Ireland. Professor Kenneth W. Hall, for one, in his work, The Vikings, places the Irish as simple clanspeople that do not have the understanding to unite, unlike the English, who come as one people to fight the Vikings, simply because England was once a part of the Roman Empire, according to W. Hall. He points out that this reason is why England becomes a kingdom after the Viking invasions. Unlike Ireland, that after Brian Boru, who united Ireland as one, but his united kingdom falls apart after Brian Boru had unified it. Hall tells us this is because the Irish lack civilized knowledge of the Romans to come together, because previously the Saxons had united under one because they had taken over from the Roman Empire. So the Saxons understood that to be civilized was to unify, according to Hall. There are many reasons why to counter this, what Hall is saying. I completely disagree with. However, not just Hall's work, many other historians lack basic knowledge of how early medieval Ireland works. Rather than taking on the subject, many people would much rather just class the Irish as simple clanspeople. I will go over the very basic fostering in Ireland to show that there is so much more to Ireland. Fostering, like marriage, was a political motivation that would build love between the fostered child and the fostered parents, that would build loyalty between the two families. So if the child is killed, it wasn't just a tragic death for one family, but the fostered family as well. If you bring in marriage alliance and family under clientship, if one of the members of a clan is killed between the family members that are married in and the family members under clientship, plus add the family that had fostered children amongst themselves, you can see how quickly a full-scale war would develop. A blood feud in Ireland, where one family would kill another family, would get very bloody very quickly, with multiple clans getting involved. The quickest way to get rid of this is clearly by paying off a debt. However, if one refuses to do so, it will get very bloody very quickly. This is why cattle raiding in Ireland wasn't just fun, because there was a banter between two war bands, in particular war bands made up of teenagers up to the age of 15 to 25. But it was way less drama, because if you steal someone's cattle, it's not going to turn into a blood feud. But if you go out your way to kill a member of a clan, you can see how quickly it would become very bloody. As Fergus Kelly points out, a guide to early Irish law, for it to be so widespread, it was an advantage not just financially, but foster families benefited from forging links with the fostered child's kin, and would call for assistance in times of trouble. Claire Downham has written that by 873, the Irish Vikings, the Hiberno Scandinavians, under the rule of Border Mac Eimer, son of Ivor the Boneless, are not just marrying Irish women, they are also fostering their children into Gaelic homes. To do so, you have to follow early Irish law. Now, to build up on that, you have to ask yourself the question of why would immigrants coming into this country foster their children into Gaelic families? Because there's advantages there. You're forging alliances. So not only does Ivor the Boneless most likely marry a local woman, start having Irish children, because those children would have grown up speaking Irish, they would have been then fostered into Irish homes, which would have strengthened Ivor the Boneless's claims within the place, because if he got into trouble, he would be able to get in the clans. So it showed that Scandinavians not just immigrated into Ireland, but they started to mix into Ireland far easier than most people would think. Life under the rule of Brodar Mac Eimer, son of Ivor the Boneless, in 873 is a very multicultural kingdom, where the Viking world, which was connected all the way from Vinland in America, all the way over to Okinawa, perhaps in Japan, given that fact that the Rus were connected to Asia, into China, the Chinese were trading to Japan, and we found Roman and Ottoman coins in the island of Okinawa, which is the very edges of the other side of the world, shows that Dublin, which has finds of Chinese silk, was exceptionally multicultured. Dr. Pat Wallace points out that the finds of female population of Dublin is entirely Irish, meaning that most Scandinavian immigrants were men that married into the local population, having children that learned Irish from their mother, played with local Irish children, but had taken on their father's language from both their father and also the wider Viking world. Because at the time, it is what it is. It is the Viking world. So the majority of the people in the bigger picture of the North Atlantic Sea would have all spoken Norse. So at some stage, they would have had to learn Norse from their father. Claire Downham has also written that by 873, the Irish Vikings, the Hibernian Scandinavians, are also fostering their children into Gaelic homes, which we had already sort of touched on. To do so, once again, I highlight that they had to follow Irish law. As Fergus Kelly has pointed out, for fostering to be so widespread, it must have had benefits between all parties. And I highlight once again, because it's so important, that to foster your children, you have to follow early Irish law, which means immigrants, the Vikings, coming into Ireland, who wanted to be a part of the society, as in Dublin, Waterford, Cork, they had to take on early Irish law. So when people first open up history books on Irish medieval history and they look at the Viking era, they think that the Vikings forced themselves in. When, if we look at it, they're fostering their children into society, which means they're becoming a part of the society. Because to foster, that means you have to follow the laws. And first off, laws of what colours children going into fostering had to wear. So that means they had to wear the clothing of their fellow Irish, or at least the colours of it. This was children of free men, right? So the colours they had to wear for free Viking men, well, the free children, for example, were yellow, black, white. And for noble children, it had to be red, green, and brown. Finally, royal children was blue and purple, and also all the colours that were under them, right? So this is the very basics. This is how it starts. When Ivor the Bonus had to foster his children, he had to follow those laws, right? This is also seen in the food they could and could not eat. So right away, they're literally judging the Vikings. They have to go into society by eating the correct food. For example, they had to take porridge, for example. Common children were only allowed to mix it with salt. Noble children had to mix it with butter. And royal children, the children of Ivor the Boneless, had to mix their porridge with honey. Doesn't seem much if you're a rich child, but they're dictating what you're allowed to eat and not eat. Plus, common children only had water-based porridge, when noble children and royal children had porridge made of milk. Education was a large part of fostering. Once again, this all goes down to your class and kin, paid for all by the education, as well as everything else was by the foster parents. So Ivor the Bonus had to pay for all this. So that means he's confirming, I want my children to be grown up in Ireland and to be Irish. So when he fosters his children into society, he's accepting that. It's the same with his son. And furthermore, we also know that we know for a fact Brodair Mac Imer fostered Northern Inale children, which means he was also doing the same with them. Now, this final part in fostering is from fostering to warband. And note here that when you're going from fostering to warband, it really fits in with the Viking culture as well. So many Scandinavians from Norway, Denmark, and Sweden would have really fitted into the society of Ireland. Majority of this information is taken from the Finn cycle. Gives us our biggest insight into what life was like for normal young men in Ireland in the early medieval world. We can see in Fergus Kelly's work that from the age of 7 to 14, the child was under fostering. So he was fostered into a family and they would have taken care of him. They would have been educating him, obviously, as I've already said, by the parents themselves. However, when this is complete and his education is over, at the age of 14, the young man goes into a world of limbo, waiting for, or if he's lucky right away, to take over his father's land and trade, or just his trade, or just his land. When he is in this world of limbo, it is encouraged for young men to join warbands. See? You can see already the link between the Irish and the Scandinavian world, how this would have benefited both. To act out their teenage behavior and violence and debauchery, to get this out of young men's system before returning to civilized society. This would involve groups of young men living in the borders and fighting with anyone that wasn't noble or clergy, and poets and bards. But we do have stories of them attacking themselves as well, as in attacking other war bands. Most of the time they would fight other war bands or common people wandering out of their own tuat, their own little Irish kingdom. They would also drink, tell stories and sing by the fire in the forests, or even go to brothels. John Kerry highlighted that the Christian church of the 9th and 10th century, when the roots of the Fenian cycle had been written, that the church was very anti of these war bands, more so that they would act out pagan rituals. Now, I'm not just talking about Viking war bands, I'm talking about the Fenian war bands. The Irish war bands were very much connected to their very old Celtic pagan roots, one of which was a culture around headhunting, which is interesting in itself because we see the same culture pick up again around the Orkneys and Niall saga. There's a sort of headhunting culture going on, where the heads of their victims were taken by war bands and taken care of, minded and brought out in festivals. So they would have been in a bag and they would have taken these heads out of bags and then put them in with the circle with the rest of the soldiers. So most young fellas would sit right next to a head. The food and drink would be passed around the fire, and just like people sitting in the circle would have had their share, so would have the heads placed next to them, as the men next to the decapitated head would place food down their mouth and pour drink as well. Joseph puts out the timing of the writing of the original literature being of the same time as the Viking attacks. Although Dublin is in the literature, even for parts set in the Iron Age, the mythology shows a very Gaelic Ireland with no Vikings. John Kerry again tells us that although you don't have Vikings, it must be noted that Irish war bands written about the 9th century and the 10th century do get into boats and go raiding, as you would say, to go Viking. So it is interesting. The things to go is to be noted here is they don't talk about Viking war bands. Viking war bands are never noted in any of the Fenian literature. There is sometimes you come across the Northmen, right? But for the most part, this is all set in the Iron Age. But it's meant to be the Iron Age, but Dublin is in the literature. It's a very Viking Dublin as well. And finally, it also talks about Fenian warbands jumping into boats and going Viking. They don't literally say the word to go Viking, but that's something very interesting. So finally, to conclude, as you can clearly tell, I completely disagree with Hall. And I can show this with fostering, as you clearly listened to me just say it there. Um, right away, there is unification there. You can see unification by the way the clans are fostering and marrying and also taking clientship. So basically, clientship was when one clan would go under another one for protection or various reasons. So they were clients. Also, you had the marriage alliance between the clans, and you had clans who were married with each other, obviously, and also you had ones that were fostered. So they would have literally fostered amongst each other, which was sort of a marriage alliance in itself between the ages of 7 to 14. And that loyalty stayed throughout the life. So once they became fostered father or fostered mother, that was it. They might as well have been, the same equal as a marriage alliance. So you can see that although it's different to what you would see in medieval England, which Hall believes is influenced by the Roman Empire, although Ireland is different, it's still somewhat unified. The problem is, just like any other medieval kingdom, you have a lot of people fighting to become top dog, and that eventually does break up society and gives them an opportunity for the Normans to invade Ireland. But there was still a sense of a top dog. When the Normans do invade, Rory O'Connor is seen as, the sort of King of Ireland, as many would call today the High King of Ireland. He was meant to be the top dog. Before him, the main family was the O'Briens, led by Murtough E. Breen, and he literally goes back to Brian Boru, who's identified by the papacy as the Emperor of Ireland. Literally says that in the literature we find in Armagh. Before that, the Ionale were identified as the kingships of Ireland. Although they never had taken the southern part of Ireland, there is a society there that has a pyramid system in place. However, the problem is that there is, although you do have other families that disagree, that they should be top dog, etc., etc., etc. You still, and that's no different to the rest of Europe. The rest of Europe has the same thing going on, where they too have various families fighting to become top dog, and that's always the case all the way up to the 17th century, where a lot of this medieval idea starts to get pushed to the side to nationalism, to more unified ideas. So to conclude, I disagree with Hall, and I do believe that Ireland was unified, but in a very different way. Maybe borders weren't always unified, and you also have people that completely disagree with top dog, but the rest of Europe is the same. So, that's my view, and thanks for listening.